Kay Loves Tara here, so we're back for another Kay's Digs vid. This time we've got Patton back. We're going to be going over latest developments, things that have been occurring since May, and we're also going to take a little bit of a look forward as to what we could be facing. So I'd just like to say it's easy if everybody does watch this video, and I'm sure Patton will explain that. So yeah, say hi, Patton. Welcome back.
Evening, Kay, and thank you for having me back. And yeah, it's been a crazy 4 months since we last spoke. I'd advise anyone sort of to get the maximum, hopefully, from our conversation today. Go back and listen to sort of my first appearance here, which was towards the end of April, and so many things have happened since. And we're going to hopefully try and make some sense of that between ourselves, and hopefully explain things for your audience as well. So I'm delighted to be back.
Lovely to have you back. Thank you for this. So basically, obviously, we want to go over the latest developments and let everybody know sort of what's been going on since, April. I mean, I know in the original video, for those that don't know, it's in the Kay's Digs playlist. Go check it out. It's the All About Q, What the News Won't Tell You. And we literally went back right from the start to where we were in April at the time. And it just gave everybody a background on Q, what's it all about, and what we experienced as anons in those very early days. So if you're interested, go check out that video. And I think both me and myself and Patton would advise you to do that. But anyway, let's look at where we are. We're 60 days before the election. Let's start there. Let's start from what the hell's been going on since April.
Indeed, we are this coming out at the end of August, so we are practically almost 60 days, I think just slightly over 62, 63 days away from the election, and that is the centre focal point of all what 2020 has been about. What takes place November the 3rd, and will Trump get re-elected, or will Joe Biden or whoever the Democrats put forward get into the office? And basically, all the events this year, in my mind, has come down to what can be done to get Trump out of the White House and get the Democrats in. And with that in mind, it's been a sort of a recapping a very, very busy last 4 months since we spoke at the end of April. May looked quite positive in terms of things were starting to turn around. From I remember, coronavirus cases were going down. General Flynn was, if I remember correctly, or his proceedings were dropped by the DOJ, and things were looking positive, things were settling, Trump was getting upswing in the polls, and then all of a sudden, sort of towards the end of May, this global bombshell took place with George Floyd that completely flipped the narrative, not just in the US, but that reverberated all across the globe. And then pretty much for the most of June and July has been the fallout from this giant flipping of the narrative, this the huge psychological operation with Black Lives Matter and Antifa, and how that's shifted towards July and August, and what's been happening with all the riots that have been taking place all across America, and sort of the implications this has had for the Trump team, the criticisms, the criticism of the Democrats, and sort of how close their relationship between B&M and Antifa there. And if you look further behind the scenes, is this an organic process that took place? Whatever you think of the George Floyd case that actually happened, but the actual reaction to it was definitely not organic. And when you've seen these things so many times, like Ferguson riots 4 or 5 years ago, and you've seen these sort of operations in Syria, in Ukraine, the Colour Revolution, you start to notice patterns, pardon the pun, in terms of how these things play out. And it's the same playbook that takes place every single time. Billionaires like Soros and NGOs funding these operations. Media
on the note of Soros, just on the note of Soros, people only have to go and look what he did in the Ukraine to actually better understand how Soros's operations work in terms of causing civil unrest. I mean, he took over an entire media channel, just to sort of get them reared up and going. And these organisations were directly funding protesting movements. So that's just a wink, wink, nudge, nudge to the viewers. Really, just if you want to understand it, go watch any documentary on the civil unrest in Ukraine. You'll get the gist of it.
Indeed, and to think that George Soros, he's a left-leaning Democrat supporter, you'd be pleasantly or not so pleasantly surprised that the actual party that he was backing in Ukraine, with the support of the US State Department and John McCain at the time, were actual far-right neo-Nazis. Doesn't matter. It's whoever the elite, so to speak, in this case, decide is their puppet and their the conduit for radical change and getting their puppets into power. Those are the people that they're going to sort of install and put in. And this was no different in terms of the playbook of a revolution with the George Floyd incident. And basically, for about 60 days, it completely reverberated in the US and globally, sort of the impact and fallout. We had lots of riots here in the UK. Something Black Lives Matter and historically had any sort of connotations to the UK. All of a sudden, you had carbon copy protests happening here in places like London and Bristol, where they ripped out a statue from a supposed slave trader going back 300 years. I think it was William Colston. So yeah, this impact can't be sort of underestimated. How global and how continuous it was, and that really sort of flipped the narrative for a while. And in a way, it's come back to sort of haunt the Democrats, because these riots, whilst they started initially in several cities, they've continued in Portland, in Seattle, in Chicago, recently in Kenosha, in Wisconsin, the incident with Jacob Blake. So all these riots, they've gone to the stage now recently where, whilst they're initially peaceful protests, when it's been continuously going on and on and on and on, independent voters and extremely heavily leaning Democrat voters, they can see the destruction and carnage and mayhem taking place, and to the absolute parody that CNN has become. When you had a reporter the other day stand inside with the Chiron saying, largely peaceful protest turns fiery in wherever it was in Wisconsin. Yeah, it's just almost like a double take moment. And
it was a take moment, because I actually caught that on a clip on Twitter, and I was literally like, hang about, these guys are literally from CNN, are like stood there, they're literally saying, and it wasn't just one clip, there was several that I saw from main CNN, but there were MSNBC as well. I call it, we will call it that. But and then literally there's fire behind them, and like, no, this is peaceful. It's like, no, look, the sky is purple. The sky is purple. Believe me, because I'm the news. I'm telling you the sky. And it's like, oh, I'm trying not to curse today, but seriously, that really, it made me laugh. I'll be honest, it made me laugh.
It's practically like these organisations, they're trying to put the Babylon Bee out of business with satire, because there's nothing left of the Babylon Bee website to satire when you see headlines and news segments like this. And it's my and other people's sort of potential theory that the white hats, meaning the sort of the good guys working in the military, they've potentially taken over some of these news agencies, and they're just almost letting themselves implode in front of the public's eyes and get to this sort of almost absurd hysterical state where even really dying the hard Democrats and liberals and sort of the left sense in America, they'll see this, and it'll cause some sort of questioning and cognitive dissonance that make them think, hold on a sec, there's something, this does not make sense. So I want
to talk about a lot of Democrats, lifelong Democrats, switching to Trump. But before we do that, let's just touch base on the conventions, the DNC, the RNC conventions, because, I mean, as you know, we spoke privately, and I outright refused to watch the DNC, and I was being a bit mardy about it, if I'm honest. It's just because I didn't want to sit there and listen to propaganda and fear-mongering and blatant lies. So I'm really, really curious. Let's have this conversation in front of all the viewers. Was I right?
Yes, yeah. thankfully, there's other people who put themselves out in, did the torture for the job. Luckily, I saw the highlights from social media, as happens whenever there's something like a live Zoom call taking place with Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. Thankfully, when you see the screen of Zoom callers and you actually see them manage to duplicate 2 or 3 callers in a 25 person call, and then you see sort of 2 fireworks go off at the event of the closing day's evening, and and you have I think there's a ridiculous song and music video which looked like something out the Twilight Zone as the convention song. Yeah, it was just a really uninspiring, lackluster, and just low energy sort of event. And everything that was wrong with America currently is Trump's fault, and no sort of positivity or solutions from the Democrats. America is awful. America is sexist, racist, homophobic, transphobic. Every single sort of buzzword cliche over the years just regurgitated, and Americans are there just to be lectured about how awful they are and how terrible Trump is, without any sort of real solutions.
That's just a gateway to manipulating the public, because I mean, you hear something often enough, eventually, and it is that herd mentality mindset. You hear something often enough, eventually you're going to start to believe it. And it's actually, I mean, don't get me wrong, I'd always say to all the viewers, don't take what the point is about freedom of speech and also freedom of information is, don't take our word for it on any of this, any of what we're talking about on these, especially on these conventions. Go watch it for yourself. Don't just take our word for it. Go watch it for yourself. That's the point. You can. We're not the news. We're not going to tell you what to think. We're just going to give you the snippets and then encourage you to go watch for yourself, just see how right we are about this. But at the same time, like I was saying, there was a huge contrast between the two. And I think that's the reason why I'm pushing everybody to go watch it for themselves if you haven't already. I'm kind of assuming most stateside would have watched it by now, but it's worth it for everybody globally to go watch the RNC convention, because that was something pretty spectacular.
It was, and it showed a real contrast in terms of energy and enthusiasm, but also as well the type of people that the RNC had, just ordinary Americans. Sadly and tragically impacted. You had the wife of David Dorn, who was, a retired police officer, I think in his 70s, tragically gunned down trying to protect his friend's property store during the riots early on. You had the couple who became an internet meme, that the Ken and Karen who were defending their homes outside from a mob, and the media portrayed as, they were waving their guns at peaceful BLM protesters.
Yeah, but they Democrat voters?
My understanding from what I've seen is they've been lifelong, not just Democrat voters, but donors for the past 30 years. But, thankfully they've, sort of seen the light and seen, I think it was they were even also, despite all that money and donations and time dedicated to Democrats, they were actually prosecuted for holding illegal and dangerous weapons by the local district attorney. And one of sort of on a sort of side tangent here, one of these effects of these constant protests and riots is it's been able to expose to the American public and globally, but especially to the American public, who the corrupt actors and personnel are in terms of the district attorneys that are sort of Soros appointees, the mayors who are in thrall and in bed with Antifa in Seattle and in Portland. And with this case, it was also with this couple, with Ken and Karen. Thankfully, I think it was the Attorney General of the state managed to just overturn their charges, and they didn't stick. But going back to the point in case, ordinary Americans like this that are impacted, that came out to defend their property, the police aren't there. So all you have is your Second Amendment, the right to defend yourself and your property, because no one else is going to be. So ordinary people like this and Americans, and I think there was another one who spoke very passionately as well, a 70, 80-year-old immigrant, possibly I think was from Cuba, came in and said he's seen the horrors of socialism, communism firsthand, and gave an impassioned plea, don't let this happen to America. So again, the difference in energy and enthusiasm with ordinary Americans telling their story, speaking to other ordinary Americans, and just this overall upbeat energy, and the fireworks display as well. And there's only one side that had this sort of positive display around it. And another interesting bit of another interesting data point is the fact that many of the viewers of the RNC versus the DNC were actually not watching the mainstream channels. They're actually watching online media. They're watching, independent commentators like Tim Pool and Sticks give their analysis and debate, and other sort of channels, which means they're not watching these sort of legacy media outlets. And the DNC people, primarily Democrat voters are, which means that they're a lot more sort of engaged. And it spells a lot of trouble for the older networks, because once these 60, 70, 80-year-old viewership is gone, that their audience is completely dried up. So also an importance there as well in terms of how the people viewing it are much more engaged. So, it seems to have done a lot of good and positivity for the, I'd say for the Republicans, but especially for Trump the past few days since that's concluded, in terms of it seems to be a shift in poll numbers.
Yes, and one thing I will say before we touch note on the polls is and again, this is just to the viewers, and I'm sure Patton would agree with me on this. A lot of the news when they're reporting on the RNC, I've never seen anything so ridiculous and far-fetched in my life. I mean, for crying out loud, they actually had to pick fault with Melania's dress. And it's like, whoa, hang on a minute. This isn't normal activity. I mean, if people can't see, for one, the bias, because this is what set me on this journey right back in 2016, was the fact that every single mainstream news outlet are reporting nothing but bad press, really, really negative, bad press about them. And when they're running out of at least, I won't say decent, but notable things to report on, they're getting really petty about it. And they did with Melania and what she wore. I mean, if anybody watching this seems to think that it's not worth watching the RNC convention because the only notable thing in that convention must have been Melania's dress, this is again is just the news manipulating you. So again, I'm just going to urge it. I strongly suggest everybody go watch the convention. It's on YouTube. Go watch both of them and make your own mind up. Sorry, I just had to sort of cut in there for a moment, Patton. But it's just something that I've been seeing on Twitter. It really, really annoyed me. But we will get to the polls in a moment. But just before we do, I just want to talk about, because I mean, you in the Q group that we're involved in, you shared a video, and this was on C-SPAN, I believe, where I will actually link this video in the description box, because you've got to go watch it to believe it. It actually looked like C-SPAN were purposely inviting Democrat voters to speak live on air, using that. Basically, it was like, if you're going to vote Republican, call this number. If you're going to vote Democrat, call this number. And C-SPAN actually ended up with, I mean, there must have been well over 10, maybe even pushing 20 people that rang in and said, I'm Democrat. I was a lifelong Democrat, and now I'm voting for Donald Trump. And literally, the reporter, I forgot his name, but he looked stunned. He was like, "Do you realise you're calling the Democrat hotline?" And it's like, hang on, we're seeing the bias here.
From a long line of Democrats, but I have to say I switched parties because I'm so impressed by what our president did. And tonight's, the whole RNC was wonderful. I think the Democrats really have to take a look at what has happened to them, how they switched their focus, how they don't stand up for what the American people really stand for. And Melania and everyone who spoke tonight were just excellent. They spoke what the real true Americans are.
Yes, I was originally a Democrat back in my teens when I registered. I am now going to be voting for Donald Trump. These past 2 days has given us hope in such perilous times. I am so happy to be voting for Trump. I am so happy that people are waking up to the leftist agenda and what they're truly about. This is about liberty. This is about freedom and taking our country back.
The way that this Democrat Party has gone to the extreme left has completely, it's appalling. I am not that. I am not that. And I will vote for Mr. Trump because I do not want the police defunded. I do not stand for those post office lies that the Democrats are spreading, because none of what he said, none of what they accuse this person from the post office is true. And also, why are we getting, everybody's going to vote by mail? Why? I have an ID. I am not stupid. I'm an immigrant. I am able to provide an ID. Everybody should be able. If I was going, I'm going to the store, I'd wear a mask. I can go shopping. Then I can go vote.
So, Laura, you're calling on the Democrats lying, but you didn't have anything good to say about them.
No, not at all. Not at all. Like I told this lady who answered the phone, I was a Democrat. I'm not longer a Democrat. They're communists.
So I just wondered, like, if we could just talk about the reality of lifelong Democrats turning red.
Absolutely. From what we've seen, Trump has an absolute, almost universal approval within the Republican Party, 96%. That was higher than Reagan at his highest point. So essentially, nobody is heading from the direction from Trump to the Democrats. There is no equivalent walk-away movement from Republicans to Democrats.
No.
The walk-away movement has been going for a couple of years now, essentially Democrat and independent voters abandoning the Democrat Party and heading towards Trump. And as you said, it was sort of surreal for the interviewer that he had caller after caller, probably about 20, calling from California, calling from New York, calling from Philadelphia, calling from Chicago, deep blue states and cities, and calling saying, I voted Democrat all my life and I'm absolutely disgusted and embarrassed with the way things have been going, and I'm going to vote for Trump. And when you have people from such deep blue states and cities calling, it spells problems in my mind for what's going to happen for the Democrats on November the 3rd. And it's my estimation that we're probably going to see the largest electoral landslide that's possibly ever happened for a good, well, maybe 200 years since the popular vote has taken place. I actually had a look a couple of days ago, just out of curiosity, where we were in terms of the numbers and arithmetic. So the last sort of landslide that took place was under Ronald Reagan, which he won 49 out of 50 states against Walter Mondale in 1984. The largest Republican percentage win came from Richard Nixon in 1972, where he won 49 out of 50 states. And the largest population or percentage of the population win actually came from Lyndon Baines Johnson in 1964, which was 61% of the electorate. I think he got 44 out of 50 states. But 61% has been the biggest amount of votes, percentage of the electorate that a candidate has got since 1820. So it's my estimation, having looked at various factors, going back, don't forget, this is something that Trump and White House have been planning meticulously. The aim was, first of all, to get in to 2016. Beyond that, he had to govern, he had to fulfill his agenda, he had to battle the deep state, he had to launch the Q operation. But then he also had to position himself for 2020. And what does that mean? Well, he wants to, in 2020, go full turbo mode, mugger agenda. Gloves are off in the second term. To do that and to be able to achieve that, he has to win 50 out of 50 states, but also he has to take back the House and get as many seats in the Senate as possible, complete supermajority territory. For me, in my mind, that means several factors. That means, first of all, making sure all dead people are off the electoral register in several states. They can't vote anymore. Tom Fitton with Judicial Watch has been doing some excellent the past couple of years in terms of how many have been taken off the electoral rolls in different counties and states, particularly in California, preventing illegals from voting. Furthermore, DHS and the National Security Agency, National Security Agency, NSA, have been since 2018 investigating and looking into election result, interference and safety. Only recently got revealed that in 2018, a patent for blockchain technology for electoral voting was also revealed by Trump. And again, this is the masterful thing about the Trump presidency. He had this in 2018, but he sat on it for 18 months. He deploys his trump card, so to speak, when and if necessary. So he's got that amazing strategic patience, and the fact that he's put this out now, and very interesting at the time that it was put out a patent on the same day. Trump made a tweeting reference to electoral security on that very day. So it's a sort of retrospective wink, wink, and nudge, nudge when it was revealed. And one anon somewhere found it out. That's okay. There's another little breadcrumb bit of evidence that Trump left for us, which made only sense, as Q has said many times, future proofs past. So all these various aspects, when added together, in terms of election integrity, in terms of making sure that Democrats don't get to steal and cheat with the mail-in ballots, add all this to the absolute outrage, anger, and disgust that many are feeling in terms of the independent and lifelong Democrats. It's in my estimation that Trump's going to win at least 45 out of 50 states. In my mind, he's going to potentially flip New York, which he said is in play, which in me was code for we're going to win it, and then also California. It might be possible. This is the sort of large-scale thinking that he has and sort of legacy. He wants to be the first president ever to win all 50 states clean, and then, like I said, get a super majority in the House and Senate, and he can really enact the MAGA agenda between 2020 and 2024. You sort of all gloves are off, and all that. With that as well comes a democratic mandate when the whole country votes so unanimously, both in terms of states and in terms of the popular vote. Then he'll have the full, like I said, democratic mandate to enact all the policy changes, and more importantly, the justice, which has been relayed to us via Q, that this will happen. Make no mistake, this is going to happen. But it's my sort of guesstimation at this stage. No one quite knows when these indictments are going to drop, but it's certainly not unrealistic to say most of these big fish like Obama, like Hillary, they won't take place because the public isn't quite ready there yet for it to happen until after the election, after this mandate has been secured. If Obama was to be arrested now, this would just inflame even more sort of widespread rioting. So however much people who are impatient and may not like the amount of time it's been taken, don't forget this is sort of the most sophisticated, well-researched, well-planned, thorough and comprehensive military operation of all time, and nothing's being left to chance. And they have to essentially safely implode the deep state whilst maintaining law and order and election integrity, and making sure the country isn't sort of split irrevocably forever. So it's a very delicate balancing act, and thankfully we have this amazing team of patriots which Trump leads as president, taking care of matters. And like I said, that the polls, they're showing it's Biden in the lead, almost neck and neck. We've seen what the polls were like in 2016. My sort of view for what it's worth, it's going to be an absolute election landslide this time round for President Trump.
I agree, and it's worth pulling note to betting odds actually to see that for yourself. And don't forget that when the betting companies actually sort of lay out these odds, they're not stupid. They don't want to lose money. So this is a no-brainer. If the odds are coming down to back Trump, then you back Trump. And it's also worth noting that that's a great way to tell how the polls are actually more than likely faked.
Absolutely. Just looking back at the polls, at the betting odds this year, I had a few sort of, as we say in England, cheeky flutters, because I saw some of the odds and I thought these are too good to sort of turn down. And Trump was at the start of the year sort of better positioned than he is once the coronavirus happened. Odds swung towards Biden for most of spring, summer. It's only recently that the odds have been moving and shifting down, and areas like California and New York that were 25-1, coming down sort of 14, 12, 10-1 from various betting agencies. Now it's still a sort of a big stretch, 10-1, but it shows that people are out there putting money, and bookies can see via their algorithms which way money is heading. So the fact that the odds are shortening means it's looking far more likely than it was a while ago. It might still seem an outside odd, but if anyone's a sort of gambling person, they fancy putting down a tenner here or there on something which is, seems a bit more far-fetched, California or New York flipping red, by all means, have a go and see what happens. I can only say what I've done myself, so I'm not telling you to do something that I haven't. But I think as we go towards the election, this is where we are now. I keep saying Trump has still not yet gone on the offensive with regards to playing some of these Trump cards with regards to any potential indictments, any potential declass of Pfizer, a rumoured October surprise, which might be an exposure of some of the high-level paedophilia, sort of Pizzagate, which we saw right before the election as well. And it might be something so damaging that would completely turn off Democrats forever. Q has said repeatedly as well, once Haiti is revealed, what's happened there, the Democrats will lose the black vote forever. Will that be before this election? Possibly. Will that be after it? Possibly as well. We don't know. Is the psyche of America ready for some sort of revelations that went on in Haiti, or does it have to be sort of further on down the line because the public consciousness isn't ready of it?
There's a lot to touch base on when it comes to Haiti, and the problem that the Democrats have got with this, especially the Clinton Foundation, Bill and Hillary Clinton, the problem that they've all got with this is that Laura Gailey Silsby really was the key to exactly what was going down in Haiti. And not just that, if you go and watch a documentary, which I believe is still on YouTube, called Clinton Cash, it actually highlights the level of corruption. I mean, they were bringing in people, taking donations and this, that, and the other, for these people to be supposedly set, construction companies and things like that. There was so much money being floated around, and yet, how many years down the line are we now, and Haiti's still a mess? The entire thing was just a slush fund system. That's it.
What took place in Haiti was so outrageous, it's almost beyond the pale. The earthquake happened, which, hearing on some rumours, was apparently geoengineered, because there is geoengineering technology, HAARP and so forth. So that might have even been an artificial earthquake, but let's just, for argument, it's just something that naturally occurred. You had this earthquake, terrible tragedy. Hillary Clinton's the head of the State Department. She goes in and sort of makes it her personal mission to come in and set up the relief effort, and brings in the Clinton Foundation, and essentially it's run like its own playground in terms of corruption, contracts, and most sort of tragically and evilly, the trafficking of children, which Laura Silsby was heavily involved in, and I believe Hillary personally intervened to get a pardon for when at the State Department.
And what actually happened there, because I read a bit in depth into this, so I'll let the viewers know. So Laura Gailey Silsby was actually working as a missionary there. She attempted to traffic 33 children out of Haiti, claiming that they were all orphaned. And in reality, they weren't. Their parents were looking for them. So police get involved. The children are found on a boat offshore. They're brought back. Laura Gailey Silsby is arrested. But then Hillary Clinton intervenes and hires Laura's lawyer for her. So we got this information from Hillary Clinton's emails, okay? You don't have to go on WikiLeaks and do a search for Laura Gailey Silsby and Hillary Clinton, and you'll come across it. So not saying anything you can't find. And this particular lawyer that Hillary hired, and these were supposed to be really, really good friends, and it's all friendly in the emails. This particular lawyer was arrested not long after for being a pedophile.
Like I said, it boggles the mind what actually took place there. And one of the sort of first data points in 2016, I can't remember when, but it was possibly after the election happened, that sort of first really hit home to me that Donald Trump wasn't part of their club. It was a charity event. I believe it was for like a Catholic cardinal in New York, about a week or two before the election, and sort of black tie events. All the media was there, all the political correspondents, politicians on both sides. Sort of, you know, the elites are all there. Hillary and Trump are the both sort of keynote speakers in this charity event. And then Trump does a comedy routine essentially for like 10, 15 minutes, taking, making fun of Hillary and whatnot and the fake news. But there was one particular moment that stood out for me where it really hit home that actually this guy's not part of their club, where he stood up and said, of course, it takes a child, it takes a village to raise a child, which, of course, Hillary would know. After all, she stole so many of them in Haiti. And you could hear the absolute pin drop in the room as soon as Trump said that, and the gasps and looks on the faces of these elites. And I just found that astounding, that the potential president of the United States was standing there in front of the room of all the elites saying, I know exactly what you do. I know exactly what takes place there. And I'm going to say it in front of all your faces, and I don't care. And just to think of the repercussions for him.
Anybody with an untrained eye watching that, or should I say an untrained ear watching that, is going to think she stole so many villagers. No. Trump's actually talking about children.
Yeah, and the dead silence was just, you weren't meant to say that. You weren't, that was not supposed to be coming out of your lips. You were not supposed to. Yeah, it was just a sort of an atomic bomb dropped in that moment. That this is just some things, all's fair in love and war, and the race for the presidency, but there are just some things you don't mention in that sort of context, and almost like a gentleman's agreement that we're sort of part of the same hypocrisy, as Michael Corleone says to the Senator in Godfather 2. But no, that was Trump saying, no, I'm not part of this hypocrisy. I'm not a part of your club. I know what your club gets up to, and just to stand there in front of everyone, in front of the media, and say it. That really woke me up, looking back on how he pretended to be a part of their club, and that never actually was. And sort of the potential peril he put himself by saying that, because if Hillary had won and he'd said something like that, that was him finished, and his family finished forever.
Which is, everyone knows, of course, Hillary's belief that it takes a village. Which only makes sense, after all, in places like Haiti, where she's taken a number of them. Thank you. I don't know, and I don't want this evening without saying something nice about my opponent.
I also think that it was at that moment that he was almost outcasted in a sense, because prior to him actually openly saying that, he was very much to the untrained eye, very much in the club. And the thing is, what not many people understand is and I know that there's been rumours going around in mainstream news, lying fake news, that he could be on drugs and that he needs a drugs test and all this, that, and the other. The man doesn't drink alcohol, okay? So whenever he's going to these galas and these benefits and all this, that, and the other, and he's surrounded by these people, he is there with a glass of water in his hand, or maybe even a cola. And all these people are absolutely, mind my saying this, but shit-faced, with loose lips. And as we all know, loose lips sink ships. So he's there listening to everything they're saying. And then by the time he actually comes out and says, yeah, I'm not keeping your secrets anymore, he's all of a sudden outcasted. So it just seems like the timeline of events, not many people actually understand this.
Absolutely. So there was the Pied Piper strategy that Hillary employed. They thought, okay, we can get this sort of orange madman buffoon as a front central candidate, because he's got no chance of winning because he's so outrageous. And then it got closer and closer, and then they started taking him more seriously. But by this stage, like I said, there's only a few weeks before the actual election that took place. It was almost, when this was out, it was almost too late, because there's sort of a realization in that moment that all those 30 years in the New York scene, in friends of everyone in Washington, that all these social events that Donald Trump would go to and he wouldn't drink, and people would spill secrets to him knowingly or unknowingly when he's drunk. He's just intel gathering for 30 years for his shot at the presidency. And yeah, like I said, we mentioned before that the man has the absolute patience of a saint. to have planned something for so long. But that's the reason that I believe that he's just been completely unflummoxed by absolutely everything which has been thrown at him, because every battle is won before it's fought, or every war is won before it's fought. Sun Tzu says, and Donald Trump being an art student of Sun Tzu, he's laid the groundwork for many years in this presidential run, and nothing's being left to chance. And something like Haiti, like I said, whether it comes out now or whether it comes out in future, it's going to be absolutely devastating. It's rumored, but I imagine nothing but electoral annihilation is what Trump and the White Hats are going to try and do to the Democratic Party, without completely fracturing the soul and unity of the country. They're going to have to put stuff out that's just going to bring the country together under Trump, and, like I said, deliver this electoral landslide. So it's going to be an interesting 60 days moving forward in September and October, whatever it brings.
Absolutely, and we've actually got some notable stuff to watch out for in September. So why don't we talk about what's possible for September 17th?
Yes. So first of all, the date itself, 17, highly significant given its Q corresponds to 17. There's an interesting flyer and sort of bit of information circulating on social media about a planned day of sort of protest and overthrowing the government in Washington, D.C. on September 17th. There's been a few threads that have floated around Twitter. There's an interesting delta of D-class, I think, from Q from 2018 on D-class order from President Trump. And it lines up on that particular date, and it might be, again, the speculation.
It's funny you say that, because one of the deltas that are actually from today, 30th of August, was Q Drop 2003. Spoke about absolute full transparency is needed, and that the world is connected. And I genuinely believe that that's like Q's way of sort of say, this is paving the way for full transparency, you know what I mean? And I think that whatever's planned on the 17th is just, again, utter distraction. Maybe maybe Soros or whoever's behind these I don't know, planned intervention things from Antifa, maybe they're under the impression that because it's the 17th, something big's coming out, and they're trying to deter it. Because we all know Q's a bit of a master at manipulating them when it comes to dates and times.
Absolutely. We've seen this before, I believe, with D5 in 2018, believing it to be December the 5th. And it was such a focus and attention on D5. And I believe it was alluding to the Hoover investigation on the Clinton Foundation testifying in front of Congress that the Clinton Foundation's corruption was going to come out in terms of its human trafficking. It was sort of so constantly pushed by Q that what took place was the funeral of George Bush on December the 5th. It's been rumored that he was sort of sacrificed by the deep state or taken out by white hats and tried for treason, whatever it may be. That distraction came because the attention and focus was on the D5, which December the 5th, which what Q was alluding to. Now, it may be that Q is sort of shining a laser pointer on the 17th again, believing that something will actually happen on this date. Again, it could be giant distraction, or maybe Q is actually calling their bluff this time and something will actually happen, which is the reason the protest is going to take place. As Q constantly says, moves and counter moves. So we don't know. What we can do is just continue to research, dig, and then spread the news. And like I said, pray, because there is that spiritual dimension and component to what's taking place. And just be aware, and perhaps take extra caution, those people across in the US, and just have precautions, have extra bit of food, water, and all the sort of preparations that they say, because it might be the case that, and it is the case that this is the deep state's last throw of the dice, and it might be that they recognize that they can't win the election whatsoever, so they're just going to go full scorched earth policy, and in terms of doing as much damage, destruction, and chaos and devastation as they can possibly do to make things as difficult for Trump upon getting re-elected, and causing as much chaos with maybe the counting and disputing the election, as Q's constantly said, all assets deployed. And it's impossible to actually predict the next 60 days because we are in completely uncharted territory. So we don't know, but we can only sort of make educated guesses about what's going to take place. But just know that this is sort of a unique period in history that we're about to go through and experience. And everything comes down to what takes place in the lead up to and on November the 3rd with the election.
Absolutely. And the thing is, Patton's absolutely right in what he's saying to everybody stateside watching this. Heed the warning, okay? They, like he said earlier, this is the last throw of the dice. They are literally probably going to throw anything at you, and you probably won't see it coming. I'm not saying that this is going to be like all out war in the US or anything like that, but if you look at what they're capable of, because I've had this debate with many people over BLM. BLM, a lot of people don't seem to put BLM on the same plateau as Antifa. Unfortunately, they are, because they're both funded by the same entity. Okay, yeah, I mean, like you said, follow the money. People follow the money, and for some strange reason, it always seems to link back to Soros and the DNC. So, again, don't think for 1 second that, if you're a lifelong Democrat and you're still going to vote Democrat, you must be safe. No, it doesn't work like that. Every single one of you is in danger, and unfortunately, so is the UK, and I'm going to explain why. So we are going to talk about the UK and where we're at with Boris and things like that for the UK viewers, and I think it's handy for a lot of the stateside viewers as well to get a gist of what's going on in the UK, because we're heavily tied to this, okay? So I'm urging absolutely every Brit to watch these US politics and investigations so closely, because my theory is the reason why the UK's been hit as hard with, let's say, the pandemic, as the US has been, and why why BLM and Antifa riots were happening here and not really anywhere else in Europe. Did anybody else notice that? You know what I mean? This was just, it seemed like it was specific for the UK and the US. Anyway, I have a theory about this, and me and Patton will discuss it in a moment. But so the EU, in order to keep its foothold in Britain, needs the US to stop trade with us. And in order for that to happen, the Democrats have to win, because Trump has okayed a trade deal, a huge trade deal, which actually makes it easy for us to walk away from the EU permanently. However, without that trade deal, we've got nothing. And we would have no choice but to be dragged back into the EU. We'd have no choice. And this isn't even dependent on who's leading the UK. That's completely irrelevant. If we don't have a trade deal with the US, we physically cannot leave the EU, because we can't do without that level of trade agreement. And the problem is, because the Democrats have got corrupt actors in just about every element of governments around the world, and so is the EU, believe it or not. They're hand in hand. Seriously, we can have it to the point where no major country be prepared to do trade deals with us if the Democrats win. That's how serious this is. So, again, with the UK in the run up to the election, expect weird things to happen. We're not exempt from this.
Absolutely. We saw back in 2016 when Obama was president saying that Britain will be at the back of the queue if they Brexited. That wasn't, of course, election interference from a foreign president there, but made it absolutely clear that he's part of the sort of globalist transnational agenda. And anyone bar Trump, sort of a George Bush or Romney, whoever like that, carbon copy, Republican, left v right sort of binary illusion of choice, they'd be on the same agenda. So it's absolutely vital that you have someone, and that you have President Trump in being on the pro-sovereignty, pro-free trade, pro-agreements between free nations like the US and UK. If the Democrats got in, then automatically that US-UK trade deal would be completely compromised. That would give the EU sort of extra impetus and leverage. As it currently stands with where the UK is, just to sort of give everyone a refresher, the UK had a general election in December last year, quite unexpectedly. The Conservative Party, led by Boris Johnson, had an overwhelming victory, something around like an 80-seat majority, winning places they hadn't won in 80, 90 years in the UK. Very strong Labour footholds, the equivalent of the Rust Belt in the USA. The Britain, the Tory party won in the north, and these very working class areas that hadn't voted Tory practically since the 20s and 30s, voting for Brexit to get done. And you'd have to say that the sort of negotiation and the sort of stubbornness for Boris Johnson on Brexit has been sort of a real sort of A+ on his premiership so far. But unfortunately, it's been the sort of only positive factor that's come from the time where he's been as Prime Minister. Overall, the feeling and sentiment here in the UK, it's not one of sort of great endorsement for what the Tory party, led by Boris, has done in terms of the coronavirus. But just quickly before I forget, there was a very good and indicative Q proof of Brexit Day taking place. I think it was at the 30th or 31st of January 2020, when you went back a 2-year delta, which had Freedom Day corresponding, which was the day that Britain officially left the EU. So again, that was a sort of a Q proof that Patriots in control, through the looking glass, that they have this the timeline of events going where they want it to be. There's also a further Q post regarding Think PM install for the UK in terms of positive things happening. Quite can remember it in full. But there's another one as well regards Boris, trust yourself, I think referencing hydroxychloroquine as well. So the impression is given that the White Hats are supportive and in control of the UK. Where there's a discussion and debate and sort of nobody knows where to sort of bet their mortgage on is Boris Johnson himself. Is he a black hat? Is he a white hat? Is he a grey hat under white hat jurisdiction? Nobody quite knows. And he's doing things that don't necessarily inspire confidence. And there's no sort of, I'd go into battle blindfolded for him like I would for President Trump if I was an American voting in the election. That's sort of clear cut from my perspective, whereas Boris is the sort of ambivalent vibes and it's unclear. But there's all these circumstantial data points that have been dropped in various moments, like Boris wearing a white rabbit tie, saying trust the plan, and appearing in front of a library with all these odd books behind him with little data points and clues. So again, it's not necessarily clear, but in the UK here, it's been sort of very blackpilling in terms of how the coronavirus response has taken place. There's sort of very, very tyrannical response from the Health Secretary, Matt Hancock, the overzealous medical advice coming from SAGE, which is the medical group advice of the UK government, the links between SAGE Group and Bill Gates Foundation, which really, and to their disgrace and shame, that the British media have been completely silent about, and it's been up to citizen journalists to really sort of dig deep on that. But I think it's a case of, like the USA, with riots happening in these small towns, you can't tell people, like Q says, you have to show people the corruption taking place. You have to show people the corruption at the BBC. You have to show people the corruption at the universities. You have to show the corruption in big Fortune 500 companies. You have to show the corruption.
I agree wholeheartedly. You do have to show, you do. But say I'm playing devil's advocate for just a moment. I view the Brits completely different to the Americans in the sense of being willingness to do something about it. And when I say that, I actually mean it. So I don't think there is a single Brit that actually doesn't know that the BBC is corrupt, that the governments are corrupt. I mean, you hear it all the time. It's usually over a pint of beer in a pub. You always hear somebody say, they're so corrupt, and nobody ever disagrees because they all know. However, nobody ever does anything about it, and it's been this way for years and years and years. But something's changed. Do you agree? Something's changed.
I think since the lockdown, there's definitely been an increase in interest, certainly from Twitter accounts that have been popping up in the UK, joining April, May, June 2020. People who are just becoming awake with extra time and during the lockdown, and obviously with all that's been taking place. I think you're more blessed and fortunate that you have a circle of friends that are more sort of cynical and distrusting of the BBC and government and whatnot. I have, unfortunately, for both myself and them, several friends who are not quite as receptive to the corruption and bias at the BBC, still believing that Bill Gates is a sincere, good-hearted philanthropist with no ill intent. And whilst the UK is awakening, I do believe we are possibly, maybe 2-3 years behind where the US is. So I think potentially in the coming months ahead, I know it was referenced by Matt Hancock that there's going to be a round 2 of coronavirus lockdowns with potentially more stringent enforcement measures taken in place. There's also much more draconian measures. There's also the legislation about health authorities or police being able to take away your children if you don't comply with them being tested for coronavirus if they're suspected, and it's debatable legislation, but it looks possibly grey enough that it might be open to abuse, and I'm very sort of despondent and not encouraged by what I think is going to take place in the UK in the coming months.
I agree to an extent. I mean, I've been through those documents on the policies, the new policies surrounding COVID and what they're capable of. I've actually been through it with a fine-tooth comb. And don't get me wrong, it's small print. And the thing is, with a lot of small print, it's just literal jargon. And when I read it, the first thing that came to my mind was, well, it's not necessarily going to be able to take children away from you. You'd still have to go because you're the parent. Even though it looks confusing, and some reading it or skimming over it might think, oh shit, they can take my kid away and without my permission. That's not the case. The guardian should always be present. But I wholeheartedly agree with the statement that because it's that greyish, it could be abused, and it's that kind of tyranny that we really do need to be looking out for. And what I fear more than anything is people like myself who are very open about following Q. I mean, I say I'm a Q follower. Believe me, I've tried scrutinising all the Q drops as much as possible. I can't help it, the Q's right. Like many anons, you scrutinise everything that you see. It's just if you seldom see it's wrong, then there you go. But, like I was saying, I think this is definitely something we do need to look out for, and I doubt the news are really going to report on it. So this is going to have to rely heavily on citizen journalists. So what I'd say, especially those that are doing things like I'm doing, keep an eye on your friends, keep an eye on your circles, make sure everything's all right, and back each other up. If one falls, back each other up. That's what that slogan is for. Where we go one, we go all. Look after your fellow patriots, because I have a funny feeling we could be targeted.
Absolutely, I'd recommend and suggest like we done sort of find communal friends in the UK. So just, if more than anything else, you can just have a sounding board to that you don't have to bottle things up, and you can speak freely and openly and honestly. And you might be completely wrong, and they won't think you're a lunatic. Try and form these networks if you haven't got these sort of like I'm luckily with a few friends in real life who are on board with what's happening. Sort of from my perspective, where I'm coming from, try and find other sort of friendship circles and communities where you can speak freely and support and help each other, because unfortunately lots of those who are still asleep and are not taking what's happening seriously, they are not going to be in a position to assist or be of any sort of productive help when the proverbial hits the fan. So yeah, it's looking like a difficult time ahead. But as I believe, and as Q has stated, it's darkest before dawn. Trust and have faith in humanity, which hopefully I saw a little spark of this weekend
Yes, you
in
did.
Trafalgar Square. For those that aren't aware, this weekend on Saturday, there was several protest marches that took place. The largest being in Germany, in Berlin. Looks like at least 100,000, maybe up to 500,000 or more. There was
And
some in France as well.
They flew in from all over the world as well.
Yeah, they had, I think, was it Robert Kennedy fly and give a speech specifically there. Very big anti-vaxxer proponent, obviously Kennedy family as well. In the UK here, we had a real sort of grassroots event. It wasn't funded by any sort of billionaire organisation. Real grassroots attendance, ordinary people and superstars, so to speak, of this lockdown, like Professor Dolores from Ireland flew in. You had Dr. Rashid, I think, as well, was there. Sort of these quasi celebrities and nurse whistleblowers there.
Yeah, there was Kate Shamarani, the natural nurse in a toxic world. She's on Facebook. She's quite active on Facebook. She goes live often, but she was at that protest. And also, which I found as quite a surprise, a pleasant surprise, Chico was there. For those who don't know who Chico is, was it the X Factor? I believe it was the X Factor.
Yeah, this is taking back.
Sharon Osbourne absolutely loved that guy, and he sang the song "It's Chico Time," and he was there on that stage. I mean, I wasn't there. I wanted to be, but I wasn't. Patton got there and caught all this live, which I'm a bit jelly over. But hey, I might catch the next one. But yeah, he was there, and the patriotism coming from that guy. I mean, it blew me away. What was it? Give everybody a feel for what it was like. Actually being there in the midst of it. What was the energy like?
It was quite what's the word? It was quite refreshing and almost sad at the same time that you finally had a sort of a normal human experience when you're going and just talking to normal people, not wearing masks, not social distancing, and sort of rewinding back to February earlier this year when life was normal, quote unquote. And what really struck me was this collection of people of such diverse backgrounds, talking in terms of people from health professionals that were there, that were concerned, people from the medical industry, old people in their 50s, 60s, from sort of a very sort of hippie bent. Sort of the more Extinction Rebellion, vegan types, let the earth heal you, those kind of cliched were there. Families were there. Families from India and Sri Lanka I spoke to. There were also people from sort of more urban background in London that I spoke to. There were people that come up from Scotland. A guy asked me, do a Scottish accent, but he said, "Hi, pal. Sorry, I've seen this sign everywhere pointing to my Q shirt that I was wearing. What's that about?" And that was, a pleasure to just try and enlighten him about what it stood for, what it meant, what the WW1, GW1A, or Where We Go One, Where We Go All meant on my shirts. And I'd say going up to and speaking to, rough sample size, 100 people there. Pleasantly, about 50 of them said, "Yes, I'm familiar and know about Q." About 25 of the others said, "I'm aware, I've heard of Q." And then 25 said, "No, I've got no idea." So I gave out some Q cards one of my friends has produced that had a sort of a link to everything, sort of a crash course, beginner's guide to Q and the Great Awakening. And I said to all of them, "Listen, don't take what I say as gospel. Research for yourself and think for yourself. It's all about doing it yourself. Do not take anything that I said at face value. It's all about putting the hard graft and hours in yourself, which is the only sort of way that you are able to speak with, a sort of semblance of knowledge and authority about things. Q is you have to do the hard hours yourself."
yes, I mean, all too often, you sort of get people. I mean, you can look up just about any sort of hit piece that the fake news puts out and research it for yourself, and you'll actually seldom find any evidence for it. Why? Because it's opinion, and unfortunately opinion has taken over the news. It's no longer news, it's no longer your friend. That's why Trump calls it enemy of the people, because it's not news, it's opinion. Every single hit piece is an opinion, it's not evidential. What we're saying and what we talk about, and anything we mention about Q, anything that Q puts out, other than obviously deltas. So when you're going through the Q drops, you have to differentiate between what's a delta, i.e., something you may read from 2 years ago that has more significance now, if that makes sense. So, that's why I always encourage anybody, with the Q drops, start from the beginning, get it up here, start from the beginning, because that way, something will happen and you think, oh, I've read that somewhere, and you'll go back through the Q drops and you'll see it. And that's what those deltas are for, to basically say, right, okay. And again, you have to think, when it comes to military operational intelligence, you never give the game away to your enemy, ever. So it takes some smart autist people to actually crack these codes that Q's left for us. But irrespective of that, you can look most of this up for yourself. Not a single thing that me and Patton spoke about today cannot be referenced somewhere. So again, I encourage everybody, even if you don't come back to this channel, embrace citizen journalists more, because all you're getting in the fake news at the moment is opinion, and that's why it's fake news. But anyway, moving on. So on the note of these protests, I mean, it was a wonderful thing to see so many people come together. And for somebody watching it that didn't attend, it's actually, and I didn't attend, and I'll be honest about this, I wanted to go. For one, I'm actually up north at the moment. I'm away for the week. I return back to the East Midlands on Tuesday. But that was one reason. But another reason why I don't actually go is because there was the threat of Antifa and BLM opposition protests, like what we saw in Nottingham. Which I did report on that. There's a video that I put out not long ago, actually, which you can go check out in the K's Digs playlist. But and it kind of put me off a little bit, because I thought, yeah, that's not something I want to be involved with, and I had no idea just how many people were gonna go. Clearly, I mean, you could, just in London, you could count over, at least sort of run an estimate of over 20,000 people that attended. Does that sound about right?
Yeah, I thought, from my mind, there's very easily 15,000-20,000 here, and the number as consensus between 30 to 35,000 sort of being the number most people said, yeah, that looks like a crowd in terms of how much it fills up at Trafalgar Square. So definitely encouraging that. I think it was the first protest of this sort of type was end of April in Hyde Park. Maybe had a couple of hundred people there. And this was during the lockdown, and the police are far more heavy-handed because of the sort of stricter legislation about how people weren't allowed to be out and had to be social distancing. Thankfully now, laws are a bit more stringent. They did come out at the end, police handing out flyers and leaflets in terms of they have the right to give an order for dispersal with 30 people or more in attendance. But beyond that, the police were relatively standoffish and passive. They weren't involved at all. And it was just a fantastic sort of spirit, as I mentioned, people of all different backgrounds and philosophies all here, because ultimately they're doing what we're encouraging you, what Q's encourages. They did the research for themselves, and from whatever perspective that they came from, they've all were there on the day because they've all decided something is not fundamentally right. Things are taking place now which are not what they purport to be, from the government, from the medical establishment, from the World Health Organization, CDC, SAGE, from the media, and they are saying, no, we are not putting up with this pandemic/plandemic/scamdemic, as I like to say. And it was encouraging and positive to see so many people there. Another one taking place in a month. I'm hoping that there can be, a twofold increase in terms of people going there, and hopefully the tide is turning.
I genuinely believe that you're absolutely on the money with that, Patton. For one, I'm actually considering it myself, so I might actually arrange to meet you down there on the day. I think it's the 26th of September, isn't it? But on a more serious note, seeing that and seeing that there was no major trouble, that the police were not as heavy-handed as they have been in the past, and to see that it was just a genuine, peaceful atmosphere, really positive energy flowing. It was like you say, it was encouraging to see. It's encouraged me to actually put my mind at rest as well about some of the concerns I had about going to these protests. And I think we probably could be looking at maybe double next time.
Let's hope so, because the UK, like I said, I believe it's far further behind in its journey towards awakening than the US is. But this is called the Great Awakening for a reason. It's not just the US, but as Q has said, the cure and the awakening will spread worldwide. And you see so many people when something like this is happening in France with the Gilets jaunes, patriots worldwide supporting. You have this in Amsterdam, in Holland. People supporting, I think, the farmers out doing protesting lockdowns. You see it in Germany, people supporting. So many people have been supportive in the USA for the past 2-3 years. And this is what's so sort of pleasant and encouraging about the Q movement, is that we are a collection of patriots globally, supporting each other, supporting each country's cause when it's right and just, trying to free ourselves from these institutions of tyranny, like the World Health Organization, like the EU, like these ridiculous lockdown laws that have been taking place in the UK or going into Australia and New Zealand now. There is that sort of collective spirit of where we go one, we go all, because this is about humanity realizing that, as was sung in a song there, we are the 99% against the 1% that are seeking to enslave us all.
I'm actually going to feature that at the end of this video. I mean, I've put on screen some wonderful photos that were taken of the day by the amazing Martin Geddes, who's a lovely guy, gave permission for us to use his photos. And I'll leave a link to Martin Geddes' Twitter below in the description box as well for anybody that does want to go follow him and check out any further photos that he posts. And also, he's very, very, how can I put it? He's very eloquent with the Q movement. He is logical, let's just put it like that. And a lot of his tweets solely based on logic. So it's definitely worth going and following him on Twitter. And obviously, as usual, I'll leave Patton'S Twitter handle in the description below as well, so you can go ahead and follow Patton. But yeah, I mean, I'm gonna put that 99% video. I will pop it on at the end, because that's definitely patriotism at its finest. But what I will say to the viewers, because, and I think I have to say this, and I'm sure Patton will agree with me for putting this disclaimer out there, these were not Q protests, not in the slightest. So we actually saw some warnings from fake news channels like MSDNC that were telling everybody that Q was planning riots and rallies and things like that. And no, we're not. We don't rally. We don't riot. We don't do anything like that unless it's a Trump rally. And then again, you never see that in Britain. But no, these aren't solely Q movement protests. They're not. These are several groups coming together to protest a common theme here, which would be save the children, obviously, because of the child trafficking cases that everybody started noticing and picking up on, and also over the lockdown and the unnecessary measures that they're enforcing. I mean, for crying out loud, the masks, I mean, anybody who seems to think a face cloth covering works, I think you need to crack a science book. Any biologist, virus handler in a lab, doesn't matter what the virus is, It could be a common cold virus that they're handling. They are always in hazmat suits. They are not in cloth masks, and that's for a reason. It doesn't reduce it getting out, and it doesn't reduce it getting in. If anything, it harbours more bacteria. So that's something that everybody needs to be aware of, because those sores around your face can turn into impetigo. So we're actually probably going to end up seeing more cases of infected impetigo than COVID-19. But again, like I was saying, the protests are not Q protests. So any news that tries to say that is wrong. And on another note about the protests, the Q movement have been embraced by every other group that were at those protests. So you got people that were protesting for the NHS. You got people that were, the bikers, the veterans, things like that. And they all came together with Q. So this wasn't a Q protest. They came together. The Q guys went there and showcased who they were. I don't always think that's wise, but hey, I think we're sort of coming into a different timeline now where it's more widely accepted. But at the same time, I have to say it, because the fake news are probably going to start having Antifa infiltrate the Q movement. And what that means is Antifa thugs dressed up in Q gear. Right, and we already got a glimpse of that a couple of weeks ago. Apparently there was a Q protest that was never organised, otherwise we would have known about it. And they were all wearing masks. Patton, what Q follower do you know that would even be wearing a mask?
Indeed, and what Q follower also has a shield, which is the exact shape and design of an Antifa shield. So these Q sort of protesters, quote unquote, they're not the brightest tools in the box when it comes to trying to conceal their sort of origins and activities. And
it was just too obvious.
It was, yeah, and sort of very, very easily gave the game away, and doing very things very to the antithesis of what Q and the Q movement is about, and seeking to discredit and cause division. And it just really shows the desperation that they have nothing left but to do potential false flags on the Q supporters and to discredit them, to try and paint them out for a potential false flag future attack by linking to President Trump. But that's absolutely not what the movement is about.
No, I mean, today, if you see any sort of gathering of anybody holding up anything to do with Q, whether it's the Where We Go One hash or whether it's QAnon or anything like that, if you see them wearing masks, they're not Q followers. If you don't see big Trump banners, old glory flag, you don't see the works, they're not Q followers. It's simple as that.
Indeed, yeah, and it was very encouraging as well that there were a noticeable amount of Q banners, people with Q paraphernalia at the protest, like you correctly identified. It wasn't a Q march. It was we're a group of independent thinking, critical thinking, citizen journalists, researchers, concerned citizens. We all know something is up. We all know something is deeply wrong here. And we believe that we are being willfully misled and lied to by this government and by this sort of globalist technocracy of the Bill Gates Foundation, of the WHO, the medical mafia, the media, all working in tandem together. And we can see where this is potentially going. And it's a Voltaire quote: those who can convince you to commit absurdities can make you commit atrocities. And meeting a friend last week on the tube who came to meet me, and he doesn't normally take the tube to work, he drives, and he saw everyone wearing a mask on the underground, and he just thought, this is absolutely insane. Everyone just wearing face masks on a hot summer's day, which is something unthinkable. But all these people have been conditioned into wearing these masks because the process has taken place, and there hasn't been enough sort of critical thought and inquisition from the opposition in the UK government. And people are just blindly accepting what's being dictated to them and are rights and liberties are being casually taken away by a government that has no right to do so. And like I said, it's a collection of concerned citizens saying enough is enough. We don't subscribe to what you're dishing out, so to speak. And it's our duty to plant a flag in the sand and say no more. And like I said, the journey is only just getting started. I think it will get much darker before dawn. And there's a lot more fighting to do, but we have no choice but to fight. And by fighting and resisting and spreading the truth to other people and getting them to think and research for ourselves, this global awakening is not Q making it happen, it's us making it happen by raising our vibrations and consciousness globally and just sort of detaching from the matrix and this false reality that we've been living and ascending essentially.
It is ascending, and many people who have already ascended, I mean, most on my channel know that I've been going through the ascension process now for a few years, and I can't help but sort of feel grateful to Q, not even just about the Q drops, because before then, I mean, for crying out loud, you're probably going to want to slap me, Patton, but I used to be a Labour voter. You know, back from, I'd say, 2014 and backwards, I was voting Labour every 4 years. But I have to thank you because irrespective of the Q drops, it helped me to actually want to look for myself. You know, about this stuff. It actually, and the information's all out there. That's what's crazy about this entire thing, is that there's nothing that you can't find out online. And it's like, how, I mean, if they can censor so many different websites like Facebook and Twitter, how are they not censoring normal websites? And again, that I was literally had a brainwave. I was like, Patriots must be in control because we're able to get hold of this information. You know, and we're seeing documented evidence. We're seeing reports from the FBI websites, from the DOJ, from the British government. I mean, you go and check out the exact stats on NHS England, you're actually going to see that there were only 4 deaths since the start of corona in the UK that were actually attributed. These were the ages of 0 to 19 years of age. There's only been 4 deaths with 0 pre-existing conditions. That's it since the start of this 4 between the ages of 0 to 19. And this, and then you sort of look further up the spectrum. There's over 15,000 deaths for over 80, and 80% of them have got pre-existing conditions. I'm not being funny, but what person over the age of 80 do you know will not die? You know what I mean?
Absolutely. And I think once this is all over, once the process and the charade and the fraud begins to unravel, there's going to be so many institutions that will forever permanently have their credibility destroyed and reputation. The big health pharma industry for perpetrating this, the media, certain politicians, the NHS itself as well in the UK, which has been seen as this sort of sacrosanct institution, completely devoid of criticism. There are people now slowly starting to speak up against what's happening, and they are being censored. There was a case of a surgeon in the UK being censored by the British Medical Council for saying the coronavirus is a hoax, and again censored. So there's going to be some very, very sort of painful recriminations that are taking place once the entire just barefaced lies that have taken place and what's actually been allowed to occur, the absolute tyranny that's taken place. There's going to be a lot of angry people who weren't able to see their loved ones because they were dying. They weren't able to visit them at their care homes. They weren't able to visit them at a funeral. And all this took place because of this completely orchestrated and planned global event worldwide. And yeah, like I said, there's going to...
And what's even worse is certain cultures have been taken advantage of throughout COVID, and this isn't just here in the UK, this is over in the States as well. This is all over the place. So, as we all know, many Muslim, Indian, Asian cultures have to bury their dead within 3 days of the death. And again, it's just ritual for them, which is, absolutely fine. But the COVID response teams have been taking advantage of that and basically telling these families that you either accept COVID on the death certificate, even when they've not been tested, or it's going to take 10 days for an autopsy to prove it. If that's not taking advantage, I don't know what is. If that's not fucking racist, I don't know what is. If that's not fascist, I don't know what is. So, and I'm only saying this because the numbers don't add up. Because we've been seeing, I only saw on Facebook the other day, there was a post shared, it might have been by my father actually, and it was a death certificate. It's not a death certificate, a diagnosis. When you go after, when your doctor refers you to a consultant at the hospital, you get like a form, and it basically said fractured knee on the right side, and then in the little box, suspected diagnosis, COVID-19. I mean, that's how ridiculous this is getting.
Absolutely. And as I said, there's going to be serious repercussions when this is all, the full scale of this deceit and betrayal comes out, and how many families individually suffered by sort of this medical tyranny that took place. There's going to be prison sentences for those that perpetrated the absolute fraud that's taken place over the past 6 months in the UK, globally, everywhere. The US just had the CDC figures today, which President Trump retweeted a quite high-profile Q Twitter handle about the CDC figures, saying that of the 150,000 deaths in the US with coronavirus, only 6% were due to the coronavirus, and the rest had at least 2 comorbidities. So this was just quietly revised, and it just shows that possibly the tide is turning. This might be a reference to what you said in terms of deltas. There was a post which was today, going back to 2018, and I was having a discussion with one of my friends who's sort of aware of Q, but sort of a newbie, that I sent the Q drop of Corona offline from this day in 2018.
Those were Q drops. Just for reference for anybody watching, there were a series of Q drops between 2013 and 2017. If you go search for them, you'll find them.
Yeah, and they essentially had the drop of Corona, so it was at 6 and Corona 14 offline, Corona offline. And at the time, I remember, because I was researching when they came out, these were satellites that were taken out. These were deep state, CIA infrastructure and technology that the cabal were using to communicate with each other. And essentially, they had their comms infrastructure completely dismantled. And okay, fantastic. Dented the operation for the deep state. We thought nothing of it. And then sort of early this year, when coronavirus came about, we had this in the back of our minds, but it wasn't paid too much attention, because obviously Corona, has multiple meanings. Okay. Then today, when that was retweeted by President Trump, an unspotted, hold on a sec, this was 2 years ago, Corona offline. So again, double meanings exist. It's a 2-year delta. Again, what are the odds that this took place today? Project Looking Glass, that, like I said, everything is planned, everything has a reason. Are we going to start seeing now from today the Corona narrative being completely dismantled, and the truth starting rolling out before the election?
And there was quite a few strange deltas going on as well. So we actually had another delta 2-year delta for today. In this time, this was about GCHQ satellites. So not only were the deep state using Corona satellites to communicate with each other through the CIA, GCHQ had their own satellites that they were using to communicate to the Corona satellites. So everything's interconnected. And there was a distress signal. Now, don't get me wrong, this is from 2018. It's Q drop 2021. And basically, it was a distress signal to the NSA, National Security Agency, from GCHQ in the UK, and the signal was no more. In other words, they've had enough. So, and obviously, Q had replied back to their no more signal that was sent over, basically saying #goodbye, and that was Q drop 2022. So keep an eye, and don't forget also, Q's been very clear about keeping an eye on the news for Robert Hannigan, being a household name. So I'm speculating now that we may hear something over the next couple of weeks regarding the shutdown of GCHQ.
Absolutely. Robert Hannigan, if memory serves right, he was the person that resigned, I think, the day that Trump became president from GCHQ, which is sort of the equivalent of the NSA, for intercepting, I think, is it signals intelligence, sort of electronic data in the UK. So he was obviously deeply involved with Spygate. So it might be the case that this is referencing what is about to happen with Pfizer declass and more news coming out of the UK government's involvement in Spygate and trying to set up President Trump alongside the DNC. So again, we don't know the full picture. We can only speculate, and the only way to be able to do so, sort of a big picture perspective, is just by doing the work, going to the Q drops, reading them and rereading them over and over again. And it takes a while to sort of have a big picture perspective and understand things when they happen. There was a very good Delta recently, sort of very noteworthy one as well, on was it the 20th, 21st, when President Trump got asked in the press secretary room, in the press office room in the Oval Office, or the White House rather, not the Oval Office, but yeah, in the White House, about Q and are you battling these global deep state pedophiles, to which he responded, is that such a bad thing? And when you look back, there's actually a 2-year delta about Trump being asked the question about Q. So again, the amount of coincidences and timestamps and deltas, it can only be done by, for me, a few things. One is complete control from patriots and Project Looking Glass technology, and second, sort of a metaphysical, divine essence and spiritual component to what's taking place now, to make this happen. And Q has said repeatedly it's going to be biblical. So as I said, I think the next 6 days are going to be epoch making in human history. So as I said before, take precautions seriously if you're stateside for what's about to happen. I think potentially us Brits as well are going to have to take sort of similar precautions, because like I said, we might see a round 2 of lockdowns. Food shortages are being mentioned in the news in terms of meat and processing factories. So yeah, it's turbulent but exciting times in one way, which we have.
I mean, it's like ridding any virus from the body. It has to get worse before it gets better. So just the deep state's a virus, and we've got to get rid of them. They are going to fight back because they don't want to lose, but they will lose. And I think that's one assurity that we can give. As to when, that's the only assurity we can't give right now. However, because so much is happening all in one go, it's encouraging more than anything. You only have to look at the sheer amount of people that are finally waking up and questioning this, whether they follow Q or not is irrespective. This is a part of the Great Awakening. This has been in the pipelines for some time. Those that have ascended or have sort of opened their consciousness are really seeing that now. So anyway, I think we're going to leave that there for now. It's been amazing having you back, Patton. Thank you so much. Again, I'll leave your Twitter handle below in the description for anybody who wants to follow you to keep up to date. And I'll also leave a Twitter handle below in the description for Martin Geddes as well, if you want to check out more of his photography. Amazing guy, amazing photographer, definitely worth a follow on Twitter. So yes, thank you very much for that, Patton.
Thanks, Kay. It's been great speaking again, and stay safe, everyone out there. I don't think we can underestimate what sort of turbulent times we have coming ahead over the next sort of weeks and months. Not to scare everyone, but just to be conscious and aware, but to be also as well optimistic about the sort of new age and golden age that we're about to embark on once this evil is cleansed, and that has to take place via first of all the elections, but that's going to require some sort of struggle moving forward. So thanks again for having me on, and I'm sure we'll do this again soon in the run up to election and see where we are, and see how sort of frantic things get in a few weeks potentially.
Yeah, definitely. I think if we sort of maybe aim to put this with everybody around the end of October, I should imagine we're going to have plenty to talk about by then. But yes, thanks for this, Patton. You take care. And as Patton did say, everybody, turbulent times are coming up. Everybody in the US and the UK do need to be vigilant. Remember, like you said, see something, say something. You know, if you see something that doesn't look right, say something. Get it reported, even if it's just to a citizen journalist. At least, you know, let's get any dodgy dealings out in the open. Okay, anyway, we'll leave that there for now. Thanks everybody. Bye bye for now.